fluted rock outcrops. We call that Karen, and there's this really distinctive geography on the surface that Paul might talk about in a minute, and what we call really fantastic Scrabble words like Dolan and Uvala and Polier and stuff. We'll talk about them in a minute. So it's generally found in limestone. I think in the Waikato you could pretty much say that karst is limestone. And most of the limestone forms karst. That doesn't always happen around the world, but it's a good approximation. There's other types of rock where you can get karst formed, like gypsum, for example, is common overseas. Marble is common in the South Island, for example. But around the Waikato, it's pretty much limestones and some quite limey sandstones and sandy limestones also form karst up around Kawhia. The distribution of the karst across the Waikato, it's pretty much all down through the west. So from Port Waikato, there's sort of little bits of thin limestone running right up through there. So there's caves just south of Port Waikato, and then right down pretty much almost to the Taranaki border. There's patches of limestone in the bush there that have got caves in them. And this is the guts of it pretty much, or what we consider the heart of it in terms of karst development is the Waitomo Caves catchment, this Mangawhiriko catchment, and what we call the Troopers Road area, which is just out beyond there. So the limestone gets really thick there, and really fantastic development of caves and all those other sort of surface features, blind valleys, slip gorges, all that sort of thing. So there's also small patches of karst up on the Coromandel, or there's one patch up there. I've never been to it. Have you been up there, Paul?
No, I haven't.
I did a long time ago.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is you often think those little outliers are less valuable than the heart of the place, but from a karst perspective, they're probably even more valuable being isolated, because they might just have invertebrates have evolved in there that are unlike anything around here, or there's a record of climate for that part of the world, or there's the bones of Noah or whatever that you understand the old ecology. So yeah, there's that patch up on Coromandel. And then the other interesting thing like it is there's a huge amount of what we call pseudo-karst, which kind of looks like karst but isn't really karst. So all that sort of tephra country through Taupo and Tokoroa and all that, and you get little tomos in there, and sometimes the water goes into blind basins and what have you, and that's more like a solutional piping in the tephra, I think. Don't know too much about it, so we might call that a pseudo-karst. And you do get that sort of that sort of fluting even on basalt boulders in places like Pirongia. Sometimes it looks like there's a karst boulder there. There's little patches of limestone actually through Pirongia as well. So this is probably the heart of the limestone through here. It goes out to the west coast. There's patches out Papara here, southwest of here, out towards Maricopa, up around the Kawhia Harbour, Aotea Harbour, Raglan Harbour, and then it just gets sort of thinner and thinner and less developed as you get up to Port Waikato. And heading inland, there's not that much east of the railway line. There's a little bit there east of Tukawuri, and further north there just all gets underneath all that alluvial stuff. So that's pretty much the distribution of karst through the Waikato. The rest of New Zealand, the big marble mountains of Nelson, a lot of karst there, world class in terms of the depth of the caves and the karst there. So Mount Arthur, Mount Owen, Takaka Hill. West coast of the South Island has got a bunch of Oligocene limestones, kind of similar to here. A lot of them are under native bush, so they're reasonably intact. There's very little of the Waitomo landscape's protected. If you said there were sort of 40 to 60 major caves, a kilometre plus long, there's probably only 3 or 4 of those actually on protected land in the Waikato. And then all scattered all up eastern New Zealand. There's little bits of thin karst all up and down there from Gisborne, Northland, Hawke's Bay, Canterbury, and then there's a reasonable amount of stuff down in Fiordland, sort of Tianau Basin as well. Any bits I missed there, Paul?
No, pretty well got it. Yeah.
It's the Wongaloa formation out from...
Which one?
Is it Wongaloa? It's out on the beach.
What part of New Zealand are we talking about?
Otago.
Otago?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, yeah, there's just thin little limestones all through that country.
Is all of this limestone across New Zealand similar, same age, or does it vary a little bit or quite a lot?
So this stuff's
Apart from the
Yeah, well, it's
marble
pretty much the same age. I mean, it's we're running usually from the oldest Miocene through Oligocene, touching into Eocene, whereas most of our limestones are across that spectrum. other than the marble, which is
Yeah.
artificial.
How many years is that?
Oh, you're talking 15 million span of time, 15 to 20. Yeah, most of the younger limestones will be 20 million. On the east coast, there are younger ones again. Pliocene, however. I'm thinking of the ones around here. Yeah.
There's the odd Miocene limestone out on the west coast here, but most of this is a legacy.
Most of it's legacy. So ballpark 25 million, 20 million, down to about 30, 35.
It gets up to about 100 metres thick in this area, and then it thins out everywhere else. They
Which is,
just
by world standards, is insignificant, actually. You know, we think of this as big stuffed karst, but actually it's a teeny weeny little bit. Because the deepest cave in the world is 2 kilometres deep. And that's a lot of limestone. And they haven't got to the bottom yet. All right, so we don't have a lot of limestone in New Zealand, really. We've got, what is it, 3% of the country, something like that? Whereas if you take a global average across the continents, it's usually around about 15 to 17%. So we're not well represented.
our deepest caves are probably about 100 to 120 metres deep, so some of them are just over there, and then down near Mahanui, if you go up sort of Mangaronga Road up behind Mahanui, this cave's up to 120 metres deep there, but they're actually on a slope, so the limestone's not very thick, it's just running down that slope. And most people that do caving around the world think about how deep a cave is really important, except the North Americans don't have, and the Australians don't have very deep caves, so they'll talk about how long a cave is. And Waitomo, our biggest one, is probably Gardener's Gut Cave, which is just northwest of Waitomo, and it's probably got about, what's it, people I know, 8 or 10 kilometres of passage in it. Yeah, hasn't all been mapped. Yeah.
Mind you, you're up to 60k in the south.
Yeah.
In the marble.
Yeah. So this is sort of your classic sort of unit of surface geography is a doland. So you can see that's a completely enclosed basin there. You can't see behind the trees. So unlike your normal water landscape where you've got ribbons of rivers running around the place, here it's all little dots. I don't know, Paul, do you want to talk about how these dolands work a little bit?
Just the overview first of all. If you look at the skyline from in the distance, you're running into basement rocks which poke out, not quite here but over the hill a little bit, which is the greywacke underneath it all.
Yeah.
And the limestones are sitting on the greywacke, and there's a bit of coal measures in between in some places, and then we get up into the limestone.
Yeah.
The limestones, if you just turn a bit over your left shoulder, you'll see the skyline is actually sloping from highest on the right, slightly lower on the left. And that is literally the dip slope of the limestones. It's almost undisturbed slope. 4 or 5 degrees sloping towards the east. And the surface which is sloping had mudstones on top of the limestone, which are Miocene. And so some of the hill tops actually are still little caps of the mudstone which has not yet been removed.
Yep.
So what you need to imagine when this place was when the landscape was being developed, is that the streams were flowing from the highland to the west, towards us, across a surface of mudstone, which was impermeable. It gradually incised into it and started to reveal underlying limestone, whereupon it just started to dissolve the limestone and disappeared underground. And as all the streams were dissected by dissolution, because they were being lost underground, you had little caps of mudstone patched left on the tops. And where they're doing the quarrying now, which is way over there, they're scraping off the mudstone to reveal the limestone beneath it. So we had an impermeable surface to begin. That was eroded off. The stream started to sink. Now, right in front of us, that was the native bush that covered the whole place. And so when the farmers came in and took the bush off, they immediately put 400 millimetres more water into the ground every year because they got rid of the evapotranspiration. So all the extra water that would have been lost through evapotranspiration now starts going underground. And that, of course, enlarges things because it's got more erosive energy. It's a lot more water. and so the whole karst system is more water going through it than it would have had under its native bush. Now, that little patch of bush is in a basin, and that basin is in effect the fingertip tributary of the streams, and it's centripetal. The water is flowing in just like a washhand basin at home. So the water is going around the slopes all around it and disappearing at the bottom, not down usually a single plug hole, but by a series of leaky spots around the bottom. A bit more like a colander, really. A colander with a plug hole as well. And anyway, the water drains in from the sides, so when it rains across this landscape, the distance from where the raindrop falls to where it gets underground is actually very short. If you think about the way nature works in rivers, this is probably the most efficient drainage system in nature. It's a very short distance to get underground from where the rain falls to getting away. In this case, vertically. And then it finds its way underground, usually by following the slope of the water table. Now, the water table is just the top surface of the saturated zone underneath. So if you can imagine all the rain going in, it fills all the joints and the pores and everything else in the ground up to a certain level, which you reach if you dig a well and drop a bucket down and get some water. And that water surface is what we call the water table, just the top of the saturated zone. And the saturated zone slopes, it's not flat, it slopes towards the nearest valley. And so the groundwater which sinks from these little dolines finds its way vertically, more or less, to the saturated zone, and then moves laterally down the slope of the water table. And the water table itself has got a topography which is lowest where the water escapes at a spring. So you can imagine streamlines on the water table, all focusing on the discharge point, which is a spring. And so you have these groundwater tables in each valley, all have their own individual slopes, all draining to their own springs. So from the day it rains here, if it goes down the plug hole down the slope, it will get underground in a matter of minutes. If it soaks through the tephra cover and then gets into the limestone, it will take several months before it gets to the water table. And because it takes several months, that's why when you go into caves, you'll see the stalagmites dripping even through a long dry summer. Because water is stored in the top of the limestone, under the soil, in what is called the epikarst. The epikarst is very important because it collects all the pollutants as well. So the epikarst is where the percolation water goes once it gets through the soil cover. The soil cover has got lots of carbon dioxide in the soil from plant respiratory processes. It makes carbonic acid. Some in the rain, of course, as well. There's CO2 in the atmosphere, as we all know these days, but there's even more in the soil, 10 times, 100 times more. So that percolating water dissolves the top of the limestone, opens the cracks by dissolution. Most of the chemical attack is where it first hits the limestone, so it gets less effective chemically as it goes down. This means the top of the epikarst has more wide open joints than further down. So when it rains hard, these catch the water gets in easily, but it doesn't get out so easily because the joints aren't so open below, and that ponds it underground. It's like the skin of the karst that ponds the water, holds it up, and keeps the stalactites dripping through the summer. And there's little greeblies that live in it. There's an ecology in the epikarst as well as in the streams. Very important. Okay?
I have a question.
Yeah.
The pH
Yeah.
of the water percolating
Yeah.
through pasture, is it different than it is under the forest cover? I just wondered because we're talking about the dissolving, the sorts of potential.
Well, obviously the rainwater that's starting off will have an acid pH, probably around about 5.5 to 6. By the time it changes as it gets into the soil and starts picking up some of the CO2. rapidly gets neutralized because of the calcium carbonate. And so most of the percolation water gets saturated really within 10 meters. So most of the attack on the limestone is taking place in the skin of the limestone, the top 10 meters, and that's where the epikarst is best developed, because all the dissolutional attack has been focused on it. But because there's big joints in faults going through, some of the water gets down quicker, and that opens up the cave passages. And so the undersaturated water can get underground by those routes, those fast routes. But the percolation water that leads to the stalactites is already saturated.
So yeah, I have a question. So if suppose I will make a vegetation clearance road to protect this tow line, how many kilometers you suggest we could not cut the vegetation for this tow line? For example, 100
Well,
meters?
to protect the drainage in the tow line?
Yeah.
Well,
Catchment,
okay.
Yeah.
If you just imagine looking from an airplane
Yeah.
at the surface of the dolines,
Yeah.
and you know what a watershed is. We do this all the time to define our catchments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you do the same thing for each doline,
Oh.
and what you find is you have a honeycomb
Okay.
because all the dolines are packed together, and each one is a polygon,
Okay.
and all these polygons are side by side against each other.
Okay.
So the whole landscape is polygons. That's why it's sometimes called polygonal karst.
Oh,
I don't know if you've heard of that term.
Yeah.
Because the catchments are all polygons,
Yeah.
and each one is a centripetal basin in its own right.
Yeah.
So if I want to protect the drainage in this one,
Yeah.
we're on the divide, aren't we? Where we're standing. You see, there's
Yeah,
another one over there.
Yeah.
So you walk on the highland around the edge,
Ah.
and you will find you've walked around a polygon,
Systems.
and this is the drainage area to protect for that particular basin.
Oh,
But you have to do it for that one as well. And the next one, and the next one.
Considering of the
So
systems.
you land up with about, I can't remember the numbers exactly,
Yeah.
it's something like 150 polygons per square kilometre.
Oh.
I can check the numbers for you,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
there's lots.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
It's
them.
like egg carton.
It's like egg cartons, exactly.
Oh, it's
Like an egg
hard.
carton.
Yeah.
That sort of rule making is incredibly hard. I mean, you guys know that better than us. That otherwise you're effectively planting off every bit of limestone dolan in the country.
Yeah.
And some of them are actually got really big gentle slopes, and they just sharpen next to the dolan. It's
Yeah.
incredibly hard to find that stuff.
You know,
Oh, okay.
we've mapped some of this doline by doline across
yeah,
this
yeah.
country. There's a
That's fine.
terrific lot of them.
Yeah.
The density of dolines is considerable.
Okay.
Oh yeah, the terminology doline. That's the sort of usual scientific word, coming from originally the original European karst in Slovenia.
Okay.
Sinkhole is the American term, which is very common. It's not the same as tomo, but there are
Yeah.
connections. Tomo tend to be collapsed ones,
Yeah.
smaller.
Okay.
This is a dissolution feature. There's a limestone being dissolved. And sometimes the bottom drops out into a
Yeah.
cave and you get a lost world.
Oh.
So something like Lost World is a solution doline
Yeah.
with a collapsed doline in the middle of it, which is collapsed into the cave. So compound feature,
Yeah.
compound origin.
Okay. Thank you.
I
Thank you.
might
Yeah.
just describe the picture in terms of the cave development here. So
Yeah.
the chances are that there's some sort of tomo in the bottom of that.
Yeah.
It may not be accessible, it may have a pan of soil over it. If you're coming up from the bottom, you might be in I'd guess a stream passage. It might be this wide with a little trickle of water in it.
Okay.
And then you'll come to a big shaft looking up, and you might see the surface or you might not. But then those little caves will all meet up. This one will meet out somewhere there with the one coming from here. The one from there will join in, and they just get bigger and bigger. Then there'll be a big spring, and it'll get to a walking size passage
Oh, okay.
somewhere down there. So that would be a typical development. And the other point I was going to make about the vegetation is that
Yeah.
those tomo entrances, or any of the entrances to a cave, are really important in terms of the ecology, because that's
Yeah.
pretty much the only energy inputs are
Right.
that leaf litter coming in,
Yeah, that's right.
the airflow coming in.
Yeah.
So these are quite important to protect in terms of energy inputs into the ecosystem, and having pasture right up to the edge of an open entrance is probably not a good thing.
Yep.
So yeah, it's good to have a good 20 or 30 metres around for that.
Probably get a meat course,
Yeah.
that's the only thing.
Yeah.
The occasional sheep that drops in.
We tried to do some stuff for the regional council in the last plan, I think, and we're trying to look at, where's the obvious break of slope where it suddenly steepens off, and that being the optimal sort of protection thing for a while. That was more around earthworks, I think, and disturbance. But yeah, that idea of having a buffer zone is very hard to define.
Yeah, I think this
Yeah.
is very important around forestry. I know we've got a block I'm in the back of my mind at the moment, actually, just across in the Waitomo catchment, where there's pine trees over this kind of country.
Yeah.
And they're now starting to clear some of the pines to harvest them.
Yeah.
Now you've got a real headache there if you're trying to protect the water quality underneath,
Yeah.
because you get your whole basins are full of pine trees. So how the heck do you get your trees out without disturbing the water? Well, you really can't.
You can't. Yeah. True.
So all the slash goes down the slope,
Yep. Right.
all the water goes down the
Yeah.
slope, and everything else goes down the slope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Devilishly difficult. I don't know how to do it really in a way which is conserving the karst as well as getting a commercial crop from your trees.
And at one point, the pine trees have some threatened species habitat.
Yes,
That's
yes, they can do something.
Yeah, that's so dynamic for biodiversity.
Do we have an idea, like from the vegetation clearance, did the amount of volume of water, etc., entering the system, did it just speed up the natural process? Or, I guess it's contributing probably sediment and other things.
Well, that's an interesting question. One of my students long ago did a hydrological study in two catchments side by side, one of which was under undisturbed native forest, well, undisturbed apart from goats.
Yeah.
It was eaten out a bit, but it was basically under native forest. Right beside it was farmland.
Yep.
Topography was the same.
Okay.
And what he found when looking at the hydrographs from the streams was the fastest runoff went through the native forest ones. The cleared catchments had the tomos bunged up by the soil which got there and impeded the drainage. And now that was counterintuitive to me,
Yeah.
because we usually think that when you've cleared a catchment you get faster runoff. In karst, apparently around here you don't, because the forest trees keep the tomos open, whereas when you clear the land, tomos get blocked up by the slash which comes down and plugs them up. This is on Glenfield and Mungapoi, side by side.
I know an example of a farm that the guy had run it really gently for years and years. They had lots of dolans that just had small grass basins. He leased it out to a guy that ran stock really quite hard on it, cattle as you do on a lease, and all the dolans appeared, little lakes appeared in the bottom of them over the years. And I think the reason was that those cattle had just put the fines down into the bottom of the dolan and created little pans.
Well, the soil slides down the slope, you see. The trees aren't holding it anymore, so the soil slips down the slopes here, lands up in the bottom. Trees are in it because you've just cleared it. It's like a filter which holds up some of the soil, not all of it, holds up enough of the soil to block the whole thing up and make all these little ponds. So it detains the drainage. Yeah. And there's more water too because you don't have the evapotranspiration. So it gets pretty wet down the bottom. Yeah.
So some of the, I wonder if we talk about some of the management issues we get on the karst before we sort of head off down the hill a little bit further. One of the first ones is not knowing where the water goes. So we've actually got a pretty average understanding of where all the bits of water drain to. We're pretty confident this stuff here will drain down into this valley we're going to in the cave, but when we were over at Pete's base there, if you looked out you could see all that grass out below. We don't actually know where that drains to. We're pretty certain. I don't think it's been ditrosed. We think it comes out near Waitomo somewhere because there's a big spring over there and it kind of, the landscape comes out as general wood, but no one's actually ditrosed it. No one knows for sure. There's bits of this area up here, we don't know whether they go into the Waitomo Caves catchment or whether they come into this catchment here. We might talk about the quarry example there in a minute. And I think there was a really interesting study done about the different catchments and catchment care versus hectares and sediments. The amount of sediment that was coming off each catchment, and because they hadn't mapped the hydrology right, they underestimated the Waitomo catchment by about 30% because no one knew that all these caves drained in as well. So that made it appear like there's 30% more sediment coming off than there actually was. So there's just really basic knowledge is missing often. It's not well databased. Paul's got a huge amount of knowledge through Auckland University, but yeah, it's got big implications for people and management. There's farms that have been sort of included in the Waikato River. I can't remember what that program is you called it, but they actually drain off the other way. They just appear on the surface to drain into the Waipa catchment into the Waikato. So lack of knowledge is a big problem. I don't think there's any great database held by council of where drainage divides actually are or where dye traces have been. So certainly be a useful thing to have. We get things like people might have in this case where you've got a piggery that's sort of facing out this way but actually poisoning someone's water over this way. So just a lot of that basic stuff hasn't been done in the Waikato. I just don't know where it all drains to. We've got a pretty good idea, but still a lot of work to do.
Right. Well, whilst we're on this, I might be just turn around a minute and have a look. And here's the problem, right? Pete. Yeah. Pete. Oh, here he is. Now the quarry. The quarry, I think, is, if we look at there's a big patch of pine trees. In front of it, there's a brown field. To the right of it, there's a grey-looking face. Do you see? That's the quarry edge, isn't it?
That's the south side of the pit. The pit is actually closer to us than that.
Yeah, well, we'll see it a bit closer as we get down there. But the quarry, which is, let's say, by the grey face, drains to a stream. We know where it goes. I traced it about 30 years ago, down to the valley, which you can see in the distance. And we know exactly where it comes up. However, here, slightly to our right, is a deeper valley with another stream in it. And that's going to go through a cave which we're going to visit in a minute. And we know where that comes up. And this cave stream comes up right beside the other spring which is taking water from the quarry. So the underground flow lines are converging on the valley from different directions. Now the problem we have facing us right at this moment is the quarry, I believe, is the biggest limestone quarry in New Zealand. It's commercially terrifically important. The country needs the resource, but they're running out of the quality of limestone they need, so they want to expand the quarry. If they keep the quarry within the catchment they're in, and all the water is going underneath the quarry, but it's draining out to the springs down there, if they keep within that catchment, then their hydrological impact will stay within the catchment they're working in, rather than spread somewhere else. They would do that if they extended their quarry on the downstream side, because we know that's in the catchment, which is where the pine trees are.
Yep.
But they can't do it, I understand, because of an Oparure there.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's cultural reasons why they wouldn't expand downstream, even though from an environmental impact point of view it would be the best place to go. They're looking upstream, consequently, still within the same catchment. They've done a dye trace, I think, which has come through to the expected spring, but they want a bit more elbow room to make the quarry bigger. And the problem arises that they get this far and they don't actually know where this water goes. They know where it goes in the middle. But when you expand a quarry, you're not sure if you expand it outside your catchment, laterally outside your catchment. And if they come too far this side, then the drainage and the spoil from the quarry will come this way into this catchment. And they don't yet know if it will or not, because they haven't done the work.
They've done some work.
Well, not work which shows what is happening.
Over in the distance is about 15, I don't know, some sort of cypress trees. Can you all see them? About maybe 2 kilometres away. And then to the right of that, that's their the quarry's I don't know, radio transmission tower for their communication. But I think, from what I understand, the quarry expansion is basically in that valley over there. But when we go closer to the cave where we go into the cave, there's the line of fractures that the cave follows actually runs basically straight into that area where they want to expand the quarry. I mean, the quarry's got the quarry expansion has got 3 areas. One area that drains into the existing route, the other one is above a cave called Camelot Cave, and then the third one is the piece that kind of drains this away. And the from that area,
Yeah.
that's my understanding.
Yeah,
but
we think,
from that area, there's a conduit. it goes. There's a cave entrance in amongst the big patch of pine trees there, and we'll actually see where the water comes out of that. And I've got I think it was in about September. They did a dye trace there. I've got a video of it on my phone where the dye comes out of that piece. But when we're down in the valley, we won't be able to get this sort of broad view, so that's why it's quite good to look at these broad views here before we go into the valley.
Yeah, right. So you get the general picture. You've got an egg box topography. Each one of these sinks, like this one, goes somewhere. And if you're trying to put a quarry in the middle of it, it's a hell of a job to know which way the water's going. And the only way you can find out, but it just requires work, and you need to do dye tracing properly with fluorometers and good gear, which can detect down to parts per billion at a spring. It can be done, but
Do they not want to do it?
oh yeah, they're doing it, but
Yeah.
they're doing some of it, but
Yeah.
they're not very experienced.
Yeah, I suppose we have quite a lot of dialogue with the quarry, because the cave, the Tiana Oti Atua, which we don't really have time to visit today, but that's actually on quarry land that was purchased from the farmer back in about 1999. But yeah, Ross's great grandmother is the actual mineral rights of that cave is still with Ross's great grandmother.
Yeah.
And
So I mean, I think that they're trying to do the right thing. They're partly being pushed to do the right thing, but they're struggling a bit, let's say.
I guess with Greymont, where our broken record thing is to say we support the quarry expansion, but only if it stays within their catchment. We don't want it in the catchment of the cave, where we have about, before COVID we were about 17,000 visitors a year. So people do our tour when they don't want to do a adventure tour, and they want to kind of maybe take photographs and have a sort of more personalised experience than the Waitomo Glowworm Cave that a lot of you have probably been to.
All right, let's go and look at the cave, shall we? Yeah.
What do they?
Unless you've got some more questions,
What do they use the quarry for? Sorry, what is the quarry limestone? What's it actually used for?
The high grade limestone they use to make burnt lime. So they use it for I think they turn it into hydrated lime for water pH control for municipal water supplies.
Okay.
And then the burnt lime, when they put it through the lime kiln, the impurities double, so they need to have to sell 90% calcium carbonate, they have to put in 95%. So that's where they blend. They have on the quarry they have 3 pits. I think they have a high grade pit, they have a lower one, and then they have a medium one, so they can blend it to get the.
Right.
So they basically don't want to sell calcium. They don't want to give away calcium carbonate above what they say it is, and the agricultural lime is 90% calcium carbonate. So they can mix some 87 with some 93 to get the 90, and they can mix some 98 with some 92 to get the 95.
I've heard that they use it for horticulture as well. When we talked to the quarry guys, they were telling us about
Horticulture.
using it for horticulture as well.
Right,
for
yeah.
Planting.
Yeah, because basically the pH of the soil is often around 5.5 to 6, and you really want the pH of soil to be about 6.5 to release the trace elements and stuff like that. So you're just not going to grow stuff. Like if you see bracken or buttercup growing in a pasture, you know it needs lime basically. So you're so your vast amounts of the limestone is put on pastures just for getting the soil, getting stuff to grow properly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a bit of a surprise being in a limestone landscape to think these soils acid. And the reason is we got all this tephra, which blankets all the limestone, so all the soils developed on volcanic. So there's not much lime mixed with it.